7 minutes, he says, like I'd personally delayed a space launch. I wanted to disappear. Now. But he won't let it go. Demands an explanation. Fine. My bus broke down, okay? Pathetic. Then he drops the bomb. Fired. Just like that, I'm staring into the abyss. Except, his eyes snag on the silver heart at my throat. And the billionaire's face, it just breaks. Goes all ghostly. He whispers, "Where?" Not at me. At the locket. This locket. See, what Pendleton doesn't know is I got this from a runaway terrified of gilded cages. And soon he'll realize her quiet kindness changed everything. He has no idea. 7 minutes, he says, like I'd personally delayed a space launch. I wanted to disappear. Now. But he won't let it go. Demands an explanation. Fine. My bus broke down, okay? Pathetic. Then he drops the bomb. Fired. Just like that, I'm staring into the abyss. Except, his eyes snag on the silver heart at my throat. And the billionaire's face, it just breaks. Goes all ghostly. He whispers, "Where?" Not at me. At the locket. This locket. See, what Pendleton doesn't know is I got this from a runaway terrified of gilded cages. And soon he'll realize her quiet kindness changed everything. He has no idea. Manhattan glittered beyond the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside, the gilded compass hummed with hushed power. Crystal glasses chimed a delicate counterpoint to the soft murmur of deals being struck. Fortunes won and lost. Arthur Pendleton, architect of empires, felt none of its allure. He felt the seconds ticking away, each one a hammer blow against the edifice of his carefully constructed world. He was a man sculpted from granite and steel, his silver hair meticulously styled, his bespoke suit an extension of his implacable will. At 62, he commanded attention without demanding it. Tonight, however, his focus was fractured, splintered by the infuriating delay. Garrett Shaw, his opponent in this high-stakes game of corporate chess, sat opposite him, a predator disguised in a Savile Row suit. The merger, a polite term for Pendleton Industries' forced surrender, hung in the balance, and Arthur refused to cede an inch without a fight. Every detail mattered, every nuance, including the prompt arrival of his water. "Everything to your satisfaction, Arthur?" Shaw's voice, smooth as aged whiskey, dripped with veiled triumph. Arthur's gaze remained fixed on the empty space on the crisp white tablecloth. "Still waiting for my water, Garrett," he replied, each word a precise cut. He surveyed the room, his eyes cold and sharp, missing nothing. And then he saw her. A young woman, barely out of her teens, navigated the maze of tables with an almost desperate grace. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, wisps escaping to frame a face flushed with exertion. The pristine white of her uniform seemed a fragile shield against the opulent surroundings. She moved with a frantic energy that screamed apology before a word was spoken. This had to be the one. Maya Jensen's lungs burned. The broken-down M15 had been the final insult in a day overflowing with them. Nursing school loomed large, a mountain of debt and exhaustion. This waitressing job, the graveyard shift cleaning gigs that followed, were the only things keeping her afloat, tethering her to her tiny queen's apartment. Lateness wasn't merely unprofessional. It was a threat to her very existence. Mr. Dubois, the maitre d', whose disapproval could wither orchids, had made his displeasure abundantly clear. Now balancing the silver tray bearing Arthur Pendleton's exorbitantly priced water, she felt the weight of his expectations, the chill of his warning. Mr. Pendleton demands perfection. As she approached table 12, adrenaline coursed through her veins. "Your water, sir," she managed, her voice trembling slightly. She leaned forward, attempting to place the glass with practiced precision, but Arthur's gaze remained fixed on his Patek Philippe, a timepiece worth more than her annual salary. 7 minutes, he stated, his voice devoid of warmth. "I've been waiting 15. It took you 7 to bring me a glass of water. Explain yourself." Maya's mind blanked. Excuses rehearsed during her frantic run dissolved under the weight of his icy scrutiny. "My bus broke down, sir. I apologize. It won't happen again." "No," Arthur snapped, finally meeting her gaze. The intensity was breathtaking. It certainly won't. You are clearly unsuited for a position requiring basic punctuality. In my world, a 7-minute delay can cost millions. It reflects a lack of respect, a lack of discipline, a character flaw. The surrounding tables fell silent. The symphony of wealth abruptly muted. Hot shame bloomed in Maya's cheeks. Tears threatened, a betrayal she fought with every fiber of her being. "Sir, spare me," he cut her off, his voice gaining volume, drawing the attention of the entire room. "I am paying for a premium service, not to be subjected to incompetence." He summoned Dubois with a sharp, imperious gesture. "Remove her. She's failed. I don't want to see her again." The word hit Maya like a physical blow. Fired. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the humiliation. This job, this was everything. "Sir, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I need this job." It was the wrong thing to say, a display of vulnerability that Arthur Pendleton, a man who had clawed his way to the top, found repulsive. "Your needs," he said, his voice dangerously low, "are utterly irrelevant to me." He was about to dismiss her entirely when something caught his eye, a fleeting glimpse of silver at the base of her throat. As she pleaded, her head had tilted, revealing a delicate chain and the heart-shaped locket hanging from it. Arthur's breath hitched. The locket wasn't just a locket, it was the locket. The brushed silver, the minute, almost invisible scratch near the clasp, the way it caught the light, he knew it as intimately as he knew his own reflection. The tirade died on his lips, replaced by a sudden, disorienting silence. The restaurant, Garrett Shaw, the billion-dollar deal, everything faded into a dull, roaring background. All he could see was the locket. He had commissioned it himself from a small artisan in Florence. He'd given it to Sophie for her 16th birthday, watched her fasten it around her neck, her eyes shining with joy. It was the last birthday they had shared. 5 years ago, Sophie had vanished. A sailing trip gone wrong. The official report? A capsized boat. A body never found. The locket, which she never took off, gone with her. And now it hung around the neck of this waitress. He felt the world tilt on its axis, throwing him off balance. Arthur Pendleton, the man who prided himself on control, was adrift on a sea of disbelief and a terrifying surge of impossible hope. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a strangled whisper, unrecognizable even to himself. "Where?" he choked out, his eyes locked on the locket. "Did you get—" The shift in Arthur Pendleton's demeanor was so abrupt, it was like a physical jolt. One moment he was a volcano of righteous fury, the next a statue carved from ice and disbelief. First checkpoint, she panicked. She ran. She thought our plan was just another cage, a different one, but still a cage built by her father. She vanished from our people, and she vanished from us. The last communication we ever had was a note she left with our contact. It just said, "I have to do this my way." We've been searching for her quietly ever since for 5 years, hiring private investigators following dead ends. We had to maintain the public story of her death to keep the shores from looking for her too. He finally looked at Maya, his eyes swimming with a grief so profound it made her ache. "All these years," he choked out. "I thought she was out there somewhere angry at me, but alive, independent, free. But if you met her at a bus station in New York, she never even made it out of the state on her own. She was alone, scared with nothing but a locket. I gave her the gilded cage. Sophie hadn't just been running from an obsessive stalker. She had been running from a life she felt was being controlled, even by a father who was trying to protect her." "And Garrett Shaw," Mia said, her mind racing. "The man you were with last night, you're making a deal with him." Arthur's expression darkened. "Garrett knows something. I'm sure of it. His son William died of an overdose 2 years ago. But Garrett, he's been circling my company for the past year. He drops hints, little veiled comments about family secrets. He knows I'm vulnerable. I believe he suspects Sophie is alive. This merger is blackmail, plain and simple. He's using my fear, my secret to leverage a takeover of everything I've ever built." Suddenly, the dinner at the Gilded Compass took on a sinister new meaning. Arthur's stress wasn't just about a business deal. It was about protecting his daughter's secret. A secret he now knew was far more complicated than he had ever imagined. Maya looked at the locket which she had placed on the table between them. This small piece of silver was the epicenter of a web of lies, fear, and heartbreak. It connected a dead boy, a grieving father, a ruthless rival, and a girl who had simply wanted to be free. "So the girl I met," Maya said slowly, "was not running from you? She was running from everything." "Yes," Arthur said, his voice cracking, "and I'm afraid that in trying to save her, I drove her into a world she was completely unprepared for." He looked at Maya, his desperation laid bare. "You are the first real lead I've had in 5 years. You are the only person who has seen her since she ran. I need your help. I need to know what happened to my daughter after she left that bus station." The quiet cafe transformed into the war room for an unlikely alliance. The cold, ruthless billionaire and the compassionate, struggling waitress were now bound by a single desperate goal: to find out what happened to Sophie Pendleton. Arthur, galvanized by the first glimmer of real hope in half a decade, became a man of action. The fog of grief and guilt was pierced by the sharp clarity of purpose. He took out his phone, and with a few swift, quiet calls, he mobilized resources Mia could barely comprehend. "I have a private investigation team," he explained, his voice low and urgent. "Led by a man named Daniel Chen, former FBI, the best there is. They've been on retainer for years, chasing shadows for me. Now they have something real to go on: your memory." Over the next hour, Daniel Chen, a sharp, composed man in his late 40s, arrived at the cafe. He listened without interruption as Mia once again recounted her meeting with Sophie. He recorded every detail, the time of day. The bus route. She mentioned westbound, nondescript. Her physical appearance, her exact words. He treated her testimony not as a vague memory, but as a critical piece of evidence. "The Port Authority has security footage, but archives from 5 years ago are a long shot," Chen said to Arthur, "but not impossible. Especially if we know a specific date and approximate time, we can start there. The bus line is a problem. Westbound is tragically vague." "What about Garrett Shaw?" Maya asked, feeling emboldened. "Mr. Pendleton thinks he knows something." Arthur's face hardened. "Chen, I want your team to do a deep dive on Garrett Shaw and his son William. Financials, communications, everything. I want to know what he had for breakfast every day for the past 5 years, if you can find it. He was at that restaurant last night for a reason. I need to know what he's playing at." "Already on it, sir," Chen replied. "The timing of this merger push combined with this new information, it's too coincidental." As Chen and his team began their digital and real-world hunt, Arthur turned his attention back to Ma. He saw her not as an employee or an inconvenience, but as the sole keeper of his daughter's last known moments of freedom. "I need you to come with us to the bus terminal," Arthur said. "I know it's asking a lot, but walking through it, seeing the space, something else might come back to you." Maya agreed without hesitation. The story had taken root in her heart. This wasn't just his quest anymore. It was hers too. The next day, the Port Authority bus terminal felt different. With Arthur and Chen beside her, it was no longer a place of aimless transit, but a crime scene where the trail had gone cold 5 years ago. They walked through the noisy, chaotic halls, and Mia pointed out the bench where she and Sophie had sat. "She was facing that way," Maya said, pointing towards a bank of monitors displaying departure times. "She kept looking over there towards the main entrance on 8th Avenue. Chen made a note, looking for someone or looking out for someone. Hours later, Chen's team worked a minor miracle. They had managed to retrieve the security archives. In a rented office space nearby, the three of them stared at a grainy black and white monitor. The footage was time-stamped. There she was, a younger Mir, sitting on a bench, and next to her, a girl with long dark hair, huddled in on herself. It was Sophie. Arthur let out a ragged breath, his hand gripping the edge of the desk. It was the first time he had seen his daughter's face in 5 years. Even in this ghostly, flickering image, he watched the silent interaction, the offering of the sandwich, the long hours of quiet companionship. He saw his daughter, who had grown up surrounded by immense luxury, finding a moment of human connection with a stranger when she was at her most vulnerable. Then they saw her get up, press something into Maya's hand, and walk away. They watched her get lost in the crowd. "Wait," Chen said, his finger hovering over the pause button. "Rewind 10 minutes. He played the footage again, but this time his eyes were on the periphery. "There," he said, pointing to the edge of the screen. A man in a dark coat and baseball cap had been standing near a pillar, half hidden. He wasn't looking at the departure board or talking on a phone. He was watching the girls. When Sophie got up to leave, he waited a moment, then began to follow her, keeping a careful distance. "Zoom in," Arthur commanded, his voice tight. The image pixelated, but it was clear enough. The man's face was obscured by the cap, but his build was distinctive. "I'll run it through facial recognition software, but the quality is poor," Chen said. "But he's a professional. Look at the way he moves. He's not a random creep. He's tailing her." A cold dread settled in the room. Sophie hadn't been alone. She had been followed. The investigation intensified. While one part of Chen's team tried to identify the man in the video, another dug into Garrett Shaw's life. And they found something. A series of discrete payments made from a shell corporation linked to Shaw to a private security firm known for its morally flexible tactics. The payments began a week after Sophie's death and continued sporadically for 3 years. "He wasn't just suspecting she was alive," Arthur murmured, staring at the financial records. "He was actively searching for her, all while holding this merger over my head." The pieces were falling into place, painting a sinister picture. Garrett Shaw, grieving and vengeful over his own son's obsession and subsequent death, had likely hunted Sophie relentlessly. The merger wasn't just about business, it was personal. It was about destroying Arthur, the man whose daughter he blamed for his son's demise. The question was, did he find her? A breakthrough came 2 days later. The facial recognition software got a partial match on the man from the bus station. His name was Kevin Foster, a disgraced ex-cop turned private contractor, and his name appeared on the payroll of the same security firm Shaw had been paying. They had their link. Chen's team worked backwards, tracking Foster's movements 5 years ago. They found car rentals, credit card charges for cheap motel, a digital footprint that led them west, following the path of the bus Sophie had likely boarded. The trail led them through Pennsylvania, Ohio, and then went cold in a small, forgotten town in rural Illinois. But then another team, the one digging into Sophie's past, found something that changed the entire direction of the search. Sophie had a secret she had kept, even from her parents. Before her disappearance, she had been secretly volunteering at a youth shelter in the city. She had a friend there, a girl who had since moved away. Chen's team tracked the friend down over a speakerphone in the office. The friend's voice was hesitant. "Sophie. Yeah, I remember her. She was different, so rich, but she seemed so sad. She used to talk about wanting to disappear. Not in a bad way, but just wanting to be someone else, somewhere quiet. She had this dream of living in a small town, working in a library or a bookstore. She was obsessed with one place in particular, a little town in Oregon she'd read about in a book. She gave them the name of the town Havenwood Creek. It was a long shot, but it was the most concrete lead they had." Arthur looked at the map. Havenwood Creek, Oregon. It was 1,000 miles from where Kevin Foster's trail went cold. Had she given him the slip and made it to her dream destination? "Book 3 plane tickets to Portland, Oregon," Arthur said to his assistant over the phone. He looked at Chen, then at Mir. "We're going to Havenwood Creek." He knew he was chasing a ghost, following the 5-year-old dream of a girl who might not even exist anymore. But for the first time, he felt he was following his daughter's path, not just the cold trail of her disappearance. And he needed Mia, the last person to see her, to be there with him. Havenwood Creek, Oregon, was everything the name suggested. Nestled in a valley carved by a winding river, it was a town where the air smelled of pine and damp earth. It was the antithesis of Manhattan's slow quiet and wrapped in a blanket of serene green. It was the perfect place to disappear. Arthur Meyer and Daniel Chen checked into the town's only hotel, a quaint rustic lodge. The change in environment was jarring for Arthur. Here, his billions meant nothing. No one knew who he was. He was just an anxious, aging man searching for his daughter. Their search began at the town library, a small, welcoming building made of local stone and timber. The head librarian, a woman named Martha, had been there for 30 years. Chen showed her a photograph of Sophie. Martha's eyes lit up with recognition. "Oh my goodness, that's Anna!" Arthur's heart leapt into his throat. "Anna?" "Yes, Anna Gable," Martha said with a fond smile. "She worked here for a couple of years. Started about 5 years back. A sweet, quiet girl, very bright, loved books. Said she was from back east, wanted a simpler life. She made it." Arthur thought a wave of relief so profound it nearly buckled his knees. "She was here. She was safe," was Chen asked, picking up on the past tense. Martha's smile faded. "Anna. She passed away about a year and a half ago. It was terribly sudden, a bad case of pneumonia that went septic. The whole town was heartbroken. She was so young. The relief that had flooded Arthur's system evaporated instantly, replaced by an icy, crushing despair. It was a cruel cosmic joke to find her, only to learn he was years too late. He had faked her death to save her from a monster, only for a common random illness to steal her from him. Anyway, he staggered back, and Mia reached out to steady his arm. The grief was so absolute it was suffocating. "I'm so sorry," Maya whispered, her own heart breaking for him. But Martha wasn't finished. The real tragedy was what she left behind. "What she left behind?" Arthur asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Her daughter," Martha said gently. "A beautiful baby girl. She named her Mia." The world, which had just collapsed around Arthur Pendleton, suddenly reformed into a new, unbelievable shape. A granddaughter. He had a granddaughter. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice thick with a desperate new hope. "Where is the child?" Martha's expression grew sad. "That's the hard part. Anna didn't have any family that she ever spoke of. After she passed our local pastor and his wife, the Hendersons took Mia in. They loved that little girl like their own. But John Henderson had a heart attack last year, and their finances were a mess. With the heaviest of hearts, they had to give Mia up. She was placed into the state's foster care system. I believe she was sent to an agency back east in New York, since that's where Anna was originally from. New York. The pieces began to connect in Mayer's mind with terrifying speed. A baby girl from Oregon sent to the New York foster system about a year ago. Her blood ran cold. "Maya, what is it?" Arthur asked, seeing the look of shock on her face. "Wait," Maya said, her voice trembling. She turned to Martha. "This baby Mia, did she have anything with her? Any special items? A blanket? A toy?" Martha thought for a moment. "I do remember one thing. The Henderson said she came with a note from her mother, and she was always clutching this little silver necklace, a heart-shaped locket." The world stopped. Maya stumbled backwards, her hand flying to her mouth. It couldn't be. It was impossible. A coincidence of staggering astronomical proportions. But in her heart, she knew it was true. "Arthur," she said, her voice barely audible. She looked at him, her eyes wide with a truth so immense it could barely be spoken. "The locket. I told you the girl at the bus station gave it to me. I lied." Arthur stared at her, his face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. "What are you talking about?" Tears streamed down Mia's face. The secret she had guarded so fiercely, the lie she had constructed to build her life, was about to come undone. "I didn't meet your daughter 5 years ago," she confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush of shame and fear. "I've never met Sophie. My story about aging out of the foster system, that part was true. But a year and a half ago, my life was falling apart. I was alone. I was working a dead-end job. One night, I was at that same bus station, Port Authority, and I found an abandoned bag in a locker." She took a ragged breath, forcing herself to continue. "Inside the bag was a baby, a tiny sleeping baby girl. There was a note pinned to her blanket that just said, 'Her name is Mia. Please keep her safe.' And around her neck was the locket." Arthur looked as though he had been turned to stone. "I panicked," Maya cried. "I should have called the police, taken her to social services, but I looked at her and she was so small and so alone. I was an orphan who grew up in the system. I knew what that life was like. I couldn't do it to her." So I made a decision, a crazy illegal decision. I took her. I went to a different city. I fabricated a story about a distant cousin who had passed away and left her daughter in my care. I became her legal guardian through a series of lies. I've been raising her as my little sister ever since. She finally looked up, her tear-filled eyes meeting his girl I'm raising. My little sister Mia. She whispered the confession hanging in the air like a death sentence. She's not my sister. Arthur, I think she's your granddaughter. The revelation was a thunderclap that shattered the universe. Sophie hadn't given the locket to a kind stranger. She had placed it around the neck of her own child, her last desperate act to connect her daughter to a past she herself could never reclaim. And through a bizarre twist of fate, that child had ended up with Maya, a woman who, out of misguided love and a deep-seated fear of the system that had raised her, had given her a home. Daniel Chen was already on the phone, his voice a low, urgent murmur, contacting New York Social Services, trying to trace the adoption records of a baby girl from Havenwood Creek. But Arthur Pendleton didn't hear him. He heard only Mir's words. She's your granddaughter. The daughter he had lost had left him a gift, a living, breathing piece of her. And the waitress he had so cruelly berated the young woman he had tried to destroy over a glass of water was the very person who had saved the last most important part of his family. The flight back to New York was a surreal journey through a landscape of shock and fragile hope. The truth had been laid bare, and its implications were seismic. Maya was terrified. She had confessed to what amounted to kidnapping, driven by desperate compassion. She expected anger, legal threats, the full terrifying wrath of a billionaire whose granddaughter she had effectively stolen. But Arthur Pendleton was silent for most of the flight. He wasn't looking at Maya with rage, but with a complex, unreadable expression. He wasn't seeing a criminal. He was seeing the guardian of his only living legacy. He was processing the twin revelations of his daughter's lonely death and his granddaughter's miraculous survival. By the time they landed, Daniel Chen had confirmed everything. A baby girl, Mi, born in Havenwood Creek, Oregon, had been relinquished by her temporary guardians, the Hendersons. She had been briefly in the New York foster system before the case file went cold. There was no record of an official adoption. It was as if she had simply vanished. Maya's story, as unbelievable as it was, fit the impossible facts. The first order of business was not a courtroom. It was a confrontation. Armed with Chen's investigation, the proof of stalking, the illegal payments, the relentless of his daughter Arthur, called a meeting with Garrett Shaw. They met not in a boardroom, but in Arthur's vast, empty penthouse apartment, a place that had felt like a mausoleum for 5 years. Garrett arrived with his usual predatory smirk, assuming the final terms of his corporate takeover were to be discussed. He was wrong. Arthur didn't yell. His voice was quiet, deadly. He laid out the entire story, supported by a file of evidence Chen had prepared. He spoke of Sophie's life in Havenwood Creek, her death from pneumonia, and the birth of her daughter. He detailed how Garrett's paid stalker, Kevin Foster, had driven her deeper into hiding, isolating her from the very help that could have saved her life. Your vendetta didn't just haunt her, Garrett, Arthur said, his voice laced with cold fury. It contributed to her death. She was so afraid of being found that she likely avoided doctors, avoided any system that might expose her. You wanted revenge for your son, a boy who was a predator. Instead, you hounded an innocent young woman to her grave. Garrett Shaw's smirk dissolved. His face turned ashen. The merger is off, Arthur stated, and this information is being delivered to the district attorney's office. Your harassment, your blackmail, it's over. Garrett Shaw left a broken man, his empire, about to crumble under the weight of his own cruel obsession. But Arthur felt no triumph. Destroying his rival felt hollow. There was only one thing that mattered. Now he went alone to Mir's small apartment in Queens. It was the first time he had been there. He saw the cramped living space, the worn-out textbooks for nursing school, the colorful, childish drawings taped to the refrigerator. This was the world where his granddaughter had been safe, where she had been loved. Maya introduced him. The little girl was 4 years old with Sophie's dark, curious eyes and a bright, infectious laugh. She was shy at first, hiding behind Mia's legs. Around her neck, glinting in the dim light of the apartment, was the silver locket. Arthur knelt down, his movements slow and careful, so as not to frighten her. His heart felt like it was going to break open. He saw his daughter in every line of her face. The grief for Sophie was a sharp physical pain, but interwoven with it was a powerful, overwhelming love for this little girl he had never known. "Hello, Mia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm Arthur. I was a friend of your mommy's." Later, after Mia was asleep, he and Maya sat at the small kitchen table. "I know what I did was wrong," Maya said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm ready to face the consequences." Arthur looked at her, and his eyes were clear. The storm in them was gone, replaced by a deep, calm sorrow and a burgeoning gratitude. "The consequences," he said, "the consequence of your actions is that my granddaughter is alive, healthy, and happy. The consequence is that she was raised with love by a woman who sacrificed everything for her when I, with all my resources, couldn't even find her." "You talk about consequences, Maya. I am the one who has to live with the consequences of my own failures. I built a gilded cage for my daughter, and when she tried to fly, I failed to protect her." He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. "You didn't steal my granddaughter," he said. "You saved her. You did for her what I couldn't. You gave her a life, a real one." The story of Arthur Pendleton and the Waitress didn't end with a simple thank you or a check. It ended with the creation of a new, strange, and beautiful family. Arthur didn't press charges. He erased the legal gray area, formally adopting Mia as his own, while legally designating Maya as her lifelong guardian, ensuring they would never be separated. He set up a trust for Mia that guaranteed her future. But more importantly, he gave her his time. He moved from his sterile penthouse to a warm house in the suburbs with a large backyard. He learned how to push a swing, how to read bedtime stories, how to be a grandfather. For Maya, he paid for her nursing school tuition in full and then funded a scholarship in Sophie's name at the school for other students who came from difficult backgrounds. He gave her a home, financial security, and a future free from the crushing weight of survival. But most of all, he gave her a family. On a sunny afternoon in a park, Arthur watched as Maya chased a laughing mirror through the grass. The silver locket, Sophie's locket, now rightfully around her daughter's neck, caught the sun. He was no longer just a billionaire, and she was no longer just a waitress. They were two broken people brought together by tragedy and lies who had found a way to build something true. They were a grandfather, a guardian, and a little girl. A new constellation formed from the light of a star that had faded far too soon. This wasn't just a story about a billionaire and a waitress. It was a story about how our worst moments don't have to define us. It shows that beneath the surface of anger and arrogance, there can be deep unspoken grief. It's a powerful reminder that the smallest objects, a simple locket, can hold the biggest secrets, and that a single act of kindness, even one born of desperation, can change the entire course of a life. The world is full of people fighting silent battles, and sometimes the most important thing we can do is look past our own assumptions and truly see the person in front of us. If this story of unexpected connection and second chances moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates a story with a heart. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next real-life drama. Thank you for listening.